You know, I've spent decades sitting across from people who are living in a reality of their own making, and if there is one thing I have learned, it is that the truth doesn't care about your feeling. It's cold, it's hard, and it's usually sitting right there in front of you, waiting for you to stop blinking. But every once in a while, a case comes across my desk that makes even me take a long, hard look at the nature of human desperation. We're talking about a level of psychological investment that defies logic, where the need to be loved outweighs the instinct to survive. That's what brought me to Sarah. She's 22 years old, standing at the very threshold of her life, and yet she walked onto my stage carrying the weight of a woman who had lost everything. She didn't just lose her money, she lost her grip on what is real and what is a carefully constructed fantasy. When I first looked at her file, I saw the numbers, $85,000. That was her entire life savings, every penny she'd earned working double shifts since she was 16, gone. Disappeared into the digital ether. And for what? For a man she had never met, a man who didn't exist, a man she called her fiancé. Her family called her a fool. They called her delusional. They had spent months shouting at her, pleading with her, and eventually they just started mourning her while she was still alive. But when she sat down in that chair across from me, I didn't see a fool. I saw a young woman who was starving for a connection so badly that she was willing to pay for the crumbs of a ghost. I remember the way she looked when she first walked into the studio. Most people are nervous, or they're defensive, or they're looking for the cameras. Sarah was different. She was fragile, like a piece of glass that had already been shattered and then taped back together. She held her phone in her hand like it was a life support machine. To her, that phone wasn't just a device, it was the portal to the only world where she felt seen, the only world where she was engaged to a man named Christian. Now, Christian, according to the trail of messages and the stolen photos she showed my producers, was a high-level architectural consultant working on a massive project in Dubai. He was handsome, he was successful, and he was supposedly head over heels in love with a girl from a small town who felt like she had never been noticed by anyone. Her parents, Jim and Martha, were sitting in the front row of the audience, and the air between them and their daughter was thick with resentment and exhaustion. They had reached the end of their rope. They told me backstage that they felt they had lost their daughter to a cult of one. But my job isn't to just agree with the parents or to mock the victim. My job is to get underneath the what and find the why. Why does a bright 22-year-old woman give every cent she has to a stranger? To understand that, you have to look at the patterns. You have to look at the backstory that set the stage for this kind of emotional catastrophe. Sarah didn't just wake up one day and decide to get scammed. This was a slow burn. As I sat there, listening to her talk about how Christian understood her soul, I started peeling back the layers of her childhood and her early adulthood. She was the middle child, the one who never caused trouble, the one who did her homework and kept her room clean, and as a result, she was the one who often got overlooked. Her older brother was a star athlete. Her younger sister was the problem child who required constant intervention. Sarah was just there. She told me, with tears welling up in her eyes, that she had spent her life feeling like a background character in her own story. She worked at a local pharmacy. She lived at home to save money, and her social life was virtually non-existent. She was lonely, and in the world we live in today, loneliness is a predator. It waits for you to go online. It waits for that first notification to pop up on your screen. It started with a simple direct message on Instagram. Christian commented on a photo of a sunset she had posted. It was harmless at first. He told her she had a beautiful perspective on the world. For a girl who felt invisible, those words were like water in a desert. Over the next 6 months, the relationship moved from comments to private messages, then to encrypted apps. He told her stories about his life in Dubai, about his lonely childhood, about his drive for success. He mirrored everything she felt. When she was sad, he was there. When she was bored at work, he was texting her. He created an ecosystem of intimacy that was entirely digital. But to Sarah's brain, the dopamine hit was very real. She wasn't just talking to a guy, she was building a future. He told her he wanted to bring her to Dubai, to marry her, to give her the life she deserved. But then, as it always does in these cases, the crisis hit. There was a problem with his business accounts, a legal snafu in the Middle East. He needed a short-term bridge loan to get his equipment released. He didn't want to ask her, he said, but he had no one else he could trust. And Sarah, wanting to be the hero of their love story, didn't hesitate. She sent $5,000, then 10, then 20. As I sat there listening to her justify these payments, I could see her family in the audience shaking their heads. Her father was vibrating with rage. He wanted to jump up and scream, "Can't you see it's a lie?" But I signaled for him to stay calm. If you attack someone who is deeply entrenched in a delusion, they don't listen to you. They just dig a deeper hole to hide in. I needed Sarah to come to the conclusion herself. I asked her, "Sarah, what was the internal narrative you were telling yourself every time you walked into that bank to wire money?" She looked at me, and for a second, the defensive mask slipped. She said, "I felt like I was finally worth something. I was the only person in the world who could save the man I loved." That right there is the hook. It wasn't about the man, it was about her own need to be significant. The scammer knew exactly which buttons to push. He wasn't just stealing her money, he was stealing her sense of purpose. He made her the protagonist of a high-stakes thriller, and she was willing to pay any price to keep the plot going. The escalation of this situation was brutal. Her parents had discovered the missing money when they saw a bank statement left on the kitchen counter. There was a massive confrontation in their living room. Her father had called her names he regretted. Her mother had cried until she was sick. They tried to take her phone away, but she was 22, an adult by the law, even if she was behaving like a vulnerable child. She moved out for a week, staying in a cheap motel, using the last of her credit card limit to stay connected to Christian. The more her family pushed, the more she turned to her fiancé for comfort. And of course, he was right there feeding her the classic lines. "They don't want us to be happy. They're jealous of what we have. Only I truly understand you." He isolated her. That is the hallmark of every predator, whether they are in person or behind a keyboard. He cut her off from her support system by turning her support system into the enemy. By the time she reached out to my show, she was at a breaking point. Christian had gone silent for 3 days because she hadn't been able to send the latest fee of $15,000. She was desperate, not because she thought she'd been scammed, but because she thought she was losing the love of her life because she was too poor to keep him. The tension in that studio was so thick you could have tripped over it. Jim, her father, was sitting there with his arms crossed so tight it looked like he was trying to hold himself together physically. I could see the pulse in his neck from where I was sitting. He had worked 30 years in a factory to make sure his kids had a future, and watching his daughter hand that future over to a ghost in a smartphone was more than he could bear. Martha, the mother, was just weeping quietly. It wasn't the kind of crying you do when you're sad. It was the kind of crying you do when you've run out of words. They had tried everything. They had called the police, who told them that since Sarah was an adult and had technically authorized the transfers, there wasn't much they could do. They had called the bank, but the money was long gone, bounced through several offshore accounts before disappearing entirely. And every time they tried to show Sarah the logic, she treated them like they were the villains of the story. She told me, right there on the stage, they don't understand modern love, Dr. Phil. They think everyone is a predator, but Christian is different. He's seen me, he's seen my soul. I looked at her and I said, Sarah, let's be real here. You haven't seen his soul, you've seen his pixels, you've seen what he wanted you to see. I had to be careful. If I pushed too hard, too fast, she'd shut down. But I had to start building a bridge to the truth. I asked her about the video calls. This is always the red flag that these victims try to explain away with the most elaborate excuses. She told me that Christian's security clearance in Dubai was so high that his phone's camera was disabled by a government software patch, or the connection was too unstable for video, even though he could send high-resolution photos of himself standing in front of skyscrapers. I asked her, does that make sense to you? A man who can design a 50-story building can't figure out how to get a webcam to work. She looked down at her lap, fidgeting with the hem of her dress, and whispered, he sent me a voice note once. I told her to play it. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking, and played a 5-second clip of a man with a generic, slightly metallic accent saying, I love you, Sarah. Soon we will be together. Just hold on for me. To her, that was a holy relic. To me, it was a low-budget recording from a voice changer app. While she was talking, I was thinking about the concept of the sunk cost fallacy. Sarah wasn't just defending a man, she was defending her own investment. If she admitted Christian was a fraud, she had to admit she was $85,000 in the hole with nothing to show for it but a broken heart and a pile of lies. That's a lot for a 22-year-old to swallow. It's easier to believe the lie is true than to admit you've been the architect of your own destruction. I leaned in and asked her, what is the dream? If I gave you a magic wand and Christian walked through those doors right now, what does your life look like tomorrow? Her face lit up. She started describing a life of luxury, of traveling the world, of being a consultant's wife. She wasn't describing a relationship. She was describing a rescue. She wanted to be rescued from her boring, average life. She didn't want to be a pharmacy tech in a small town. She wanted to be someone important. And Christian had promised her that importance. But then it was time to pull back the curtain. I have a team of the best investigators in the business, and they had been working on this for weeks. We didn't just look at the messages, we tracked the digital footprint. I told Sarah, we did some digging, and I want you to look at the screen behind me. The first thing we showed was a reverse image search of the photos Christian had sent her. We found the real man in those photos. He wasn't an architect in Dubai. He was a fitness influencer living in Brazil who had no idea his images were being used to steal money from young women in America. Sarah's face went pale. No, she said, that's not him. This guy must have stolen Christian's photos. I shook my head. Sarah, this man has a verified account with 3 million followers. He has videos of himself in Brazil dating back 5 years. He's married with 2 kids. He is not Christian. She started to hyperventilate. Her mother stood up to go to her, but I waved her back. Sarah needed to sit in this discomfort. She needed to feel the weight of the reality crashing down. I showed her the IP addresses of the messages she had received. They weren't coming from Dubai. They were coming from a series of internet cafes in a specific neighborhood in Lagos, Nigeria. We showed her the script that these scammers use, a literal PDF document we recovered from a similar investigation that contained the exact same phrases Christian had used on her. I've never felt this way about anyone before. You are my North Star. The world is against us. It was a template. She was looking at a ghost-written script of her own romance. The confrontation phase of these shows is never about winning an argument. It's about a collision between a fantasy and a fact. Sarah started shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. But he knew things, she sobbed. He knew about my dog that died when I was 10. He knew about my favorite book. I looked at her and said, Sarah, did you ever post about that dog on your Facebook page 4 years ago? Is your favorite book listed in your About Me section on any of your social profiles? She stopped. The realization hit her like a physical blow. These predators don't just guess, they harvest. They had spent weeks farming her data before they ever sent that first message. They knew her vulnerabilities before she even knew they existed. They didn't love her, they studied her. They studied her like a mark. I looked at Jim and Martha. Jim was crying now too. We told you, Sarah, he said, his voice cracking. We told you it wasn't real. I turned to him and said, Jim, that doesn't help right now. She didn't need a lecture then, and she doesn't need an I told you so now. She needed a way out of the fog, and she didn't know how to find it. I turned back to Sarah. Her phone was sitting on the table between us. It chimed. A new message. We had the feed mirrored on the big screen. It was from Christian. It said, honey, I heard you're on a TV show. Don't let them brainwash you. They want to tear us apart because they don't believe in us. I need 5,000 more for the final clearance. Please, for our future. The audience gasped. The sheer audacity of the scammer messaging her while she was sitting on my stage was breathtaking. He was watching her. He knew where she was. He was trying to exert his control in real time. Pick up the phone, Sarah, I said. My voice was calm but firm. Look at that message. Is that a man who loves you, or is that a man who is checking his ATM balance? She stared at the screen. You could see the internal war playing out behind her eyes. One part of her was screaming to believe him, to stay in the warm cocoon of the lie. The other part, the part that had been buried under $85,000 of debt and a year of isolation, was finally waking up. She picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. For a moment, I thought she was going to type back. I thought she was going to tell him she still loved him. But then she did something I didn't expect. She didn't type a word. She looked at me, her eyes red and raw, and she handed the phone to me. Help me, she whispered. Please, just make it stop. That was the breakthrough. That was the moment the victim decided to become a survivor. But the road back from a betrayal this deep isn't a straight line. It's a jagged, painful climb out of a very deep hole. Taking that phone from her felt like taking a weapon out of the hands of someone who had been pointed at their own head for a year. It was heavy with the weight of her entire identity. I looked down at the screen, and there it was. Another message pinging with a relentless, predatory rhythm. This Christian was sensing her slip away, and like any cornered animal, he was baring his teeth. But he was doing it with words of love. I looked at Sarah and I said, you know what this is? This isn't a conversation. This is a script. This is a man sitting in a room with 12 other phones just like yours, running the same play on 12 other women who are just as lonely and just as hopeful as you are. I wanted that to sting. I wanted her to feel the cold splash of reality because the warm bath of the lie was what was drowning her. I turned the phone around so the audience could see the sheer frequency of the messages. It was a barrage. Every time she didn't answer within 3 minutes, he'd pivot from I love you to I'm in trouble to how could you do this to us? It was a master class in emotional hijacking. I looked over at Jim and Martha, and I could see the conflict in their eyes. They wanted to run over and hug her, but they also wanted to scream at her for being so gullible. I had to address them too. Jim, I said, leaning toward him. You've been shouting at her for months. You've been telling her she's a fool. Do you think that made her want to come to you when things got weird? Or did it just make her run faster into the arms of the guy who told her she was a princess? Jim looked down at his shoes, his face turning a deep shade of red. He knew I was right. When we alienate the people we love because they're making a mistake, we leave them with no one to talk to but the person who is exploiting them. I told them both. You have to stop being her judges and start being her safety net, because she is about to fall, and she is going to fall hard. I turned back to Sarah. I wanted to talk about the money. $85,000. To a 22-year-old making $15 an hour, that isn't just a number, that is a decade of her life. That's her future home, her future car, her independence. Sarah, I ask, where did that money come from? Walk me through the day you emptied your savings account. She closed her eyes, and I could see her transported back to that bank lobby. She told me she felt sick. She said her hands were shaking so bad she could barely sign the wire transfer form. The teller had even asked her if she was okay. The bank had tried to warn her they'd seen this before, but she had lied to them. She told them she was buying a property abroad. She told them her fiancé was a diplomat. She lied to protect the man who was robbing her. I asked her, why did you lie for him? Why did you choose a stranger over the people who raised you? Her answer was the most honest thing she'd said all day. Because he made me feel like I was special, she whispered. My whole life, I've just been the quiet one. I've been the girl in the background. Christian made me feel like I was the lead in a movie. He told me I was his queen. My parents, they just see me as a kid who works at a pharmacy. He saw me as a woman who could save his life. Who wouldn't want to believe that? That is the core of every romance scam. They don't sell you love. They sell you a version of yourself that you've always wanted to be. They sell you significance. I told her, Sarah, you were addicted. You were addicted to the way he made you feel. This wasn't about him. It was about the drug of validation. And like any addict, you were willing to sell your house, your soul, and your family just to get one more hit of that I love you text. I decided it was time to bring in a little more evidence. I had my team pull up a database of known scammer profiles. We showed her a gallery of Christians, different names, different backstories, but all using the same 4 or 5 photos of that Brazilian influencer. We showed her a woman from Ohio, a grandmother from Florida, and a teacher from Oregon, all of whom had been engaged to the same man in those photos. One of them had lost her house. Another had lost her pension. As Sarah watched these women's stories flash across the screen, the wall she'd built around her heart started to crumble. She wasn't his one and only. She was just a line item on a spreadsheet in a scam center half a world away. I watched her posture change. The defiance left her. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked small, so much younger than 22. I stood up and walked over to her. I don't always do that, but sometimes you have to break the distance. I sat on the edge of the stage right next to her chair. Look at me, I said. She looked up, her eyes wide and wet. You are not a fool. You are a person who has a huge capacity for love and a huge capacity for loyalty. Those are good things. Those are beautiful things. But you gave those gifts to a thief. You handed your heart to a ghost, and he used it to get to your wallet. The $85,000 is gone. We have to make peace with that. It's a very expensive tuition for a very hard lesson, but you are still here. Your life isn't over, but the fantasy has to die today. It has to die right here on this stage in front of everyone. She started to sob then, the kind of deep, gut-wrenching sobs that come from the very bottom of the soul. It was the sound of a dream dying. Her mother, Martha, couldn't take it anymore. She rushed onto the stage, and for the first time in a year, Sarah didn't pull away. She leaned into her mother and just let go. It was a powerful moment, but I knew it was only the beginning. The breakthrough is the easy part. The walk away is where the real work happens. Because tomorrow, when she's back in her bedroom and the house is quiet and her phone is sitting there, she's going to feel that itch. She's going to want to check for a message. She's going to want to believe that maybe, just maybe, all of this was a big misunderstanding and Christian is really out there waiting for her. I told her, we're going to do something right now. We're going to delete the apps, we're going to block the numbers, and we're going to change your phone number before you leave this building. She hesitated. That was the addiction talking. She looked at the phone in my hand like it was a piece of her own skin. But what if she started to say, I cut her off? There is no what if, Sarah. There is only what is. And what is that you are being hunted. If you keep this door open, even a crack, he will crawl back in. He's a professional. He knows how to apologize. He knows how to make you feel guilty for doubting him. He will tell you that I'm a TV doctor who doesn't know anything. He will tell you that your parents are controlling you. He will use every weapon in his arsenal to get back into your head. You have to shut the door and bolt it shut. I looked at Jim. Jim, you've got to be the one to help her with this, not by judging her, but by being her partner. You two need to go through her finances together. You need to help her figure out a way to move forward, even if it means she's living at home for the next 5 years to pay off the debt she's accumulated. You have to be the father she can lean on, not the one she has to hide from. Jim nodded, his face solemn. He looked like he had a mission now. He didn't look angry anymore, he looked determined. But I wasn't done with Sarah yet. There was one more piece to this puzzle. I had to address the shame. Shame is the glue that keeps people in these scams. They're so embarrassed that they've been taken that they keep the lie going just so they don't have to face the judgment of the world. I told the audience, and I told the millions of people watching at home, if you think this couldn't happen to you, you are wrong. These scammers aren't looking for stupid people. They are looking for lonely people. They are looking for people in transition. They are looking for anyone who has a hole in their heart that they're trying to fill. Sarah isn't the problem here. The predators are the problem. But Sarah has to be the solution. I turned back to her. Are you ready to be the solution, Sarah? Are you ready to stop being a victim and start being a survivor? She took a deep breath, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and nodded. Yes, she said. Her voice was thin, but it was there. It was a start. I sat there with her for a moment, just letting the silence do some of the heavy lifting. In my business, people are often terrified of silence because that's when the truth finally catches up to them. For Sarah, that silence was loud. It was the sound of a 22-year-old realizing her fiancé was a ghost, her savings were a memory, and her happily ever after was a script written by a criminal in a sweatshop. I watched her look at that phone one last time before I handed it over to my head of security. We didn't just need to block the number. We needed to scrub her digital life. I told her, Sarah, what we're about to do is going to feel like an amputation. You've been living in this digital world for so long that your brain has actually rewired itself to crave those notifications. When that phone doesn't buzz tonight, you're going to feel a phantom limb. You're going to feel an itch to reach out, to check, to see if he's okay. But you have to remember, Christian isn't okay because Christian isn't real. The person on the other end of that line is a predator who is already moving on to his next victim. He doesn't miss you, he misses your money. The reality of $85,000 is a hard pill to swallow, especially when you're standing at the starting line of your adult life. We spent a long time talking about the math. I've always said that you can't manage what you don't measure. Sarah had spent a year refusing to look at the numbers because the numbers were the enemy of her fantasy. But now we laid it all out. She had drained her savings, maxed out 3 credit cards, and even taken out a personal loan that she'd lied to the bank about. She was in a hole that felt bottomless. I looked at Jim and Martha and I said, "This is where the rubber meets the road. You can't bail her out. If you pay this debt for her, she will never learn the gravity of the choices she made. But you can walk beside her while she pays it back. You can give her a place to live, you can help her budget, and you can provide the emotional stability she was trying to buy from a stranger." Jim nodded, and I could see he was starting to get it. He realized that his anger was just a shield for his own fear. He was terrified for his daughter, and he'd been using his voice like a hammer instead of a bridge. As we moved into the later part of our session, I wanted to dig into the recovery aspect of this. This isn't just about financial recovery, it's about psychological reconstruction. Sarah had a fundamental broken picker. She was looking for external validation to fix an internal problem. I told her, "You've spent 22 years feeling like the wallpaper in your own life. You thought being the girl with the rich architect fiancé made you special. But the truth is, you were special before he ever sent that first DM. You were a hard worker, you were a loyal daughter, you were a person with a future. You traded your reality for a fairy tale. And the problem with fairy tales is that they always end when the book closes." I saw her flinch at that, but I needed her to hear it. She had to stop being a victim of her own imagination. I asked my staff to bring out a series of resources we had put together for her. We didn't just give her a good luck and a handshake. We set her up with a financial therapist, someone who specializes in the intersection of money and emotion. Because if she didn't fix the why behind her spending, she'd just find another Christian 6 months from now. I also arranged for her to have sessions with a trauma counselor who deals specifically with cyber exploitation. People don't realize that being scammed is a form of assault. It's a violation of the mind and the heart. Sarah was exhibiting signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. She was jumpy, she was hypervigilant, and she was mourning the death of the man she thought she was going to marry. Even though he wasn't real, the grief she felt was 100% authentic. You can't just tell someone to get over a year of their life. You have to process it. One of the most powerful moments happened when I asked Sarah to look at her mother. Martha was sitting there, her face etched with a year's worth of worry. I said, "Sarah, look at that woman. She has spent the last 12 months crying herself to sleep because she thought she was losing you. That is real love. It's not flashy, it doesn't come with photos of Dubai skyscrapers, and it doesn't tell you what you want to hear every second of the day. It's messy, it's frustrating, and it's right here in this room. That is what you traded for a digital ghost." Sarah reached out and took her mother's hand, and for the first time, she didn't look like she was performing. She looked like a daughter again. She looked like she was coming home. But I had to be the one to give her the cold, hard truth about the outcome. I told her, "Sarah, the chances of you ever seeing a dime of that $85,000 again are effectively zero. The authorities in Nigeria or wherever this person is located aren't going to spend their resources chasing a wire transfer that you voluntarily sent. You have to mourn that money like it's gone, because it is. You are starting over at zero. In fact, you're starting over at less than zero because of the debt. It's going to take you years of working those pharmacy shifts to get back to where you were. But I would rather you be broke and grounded in reality than have $1 million and be living in a lie, because a lie is a prison. And today, the doors are open." We spent some time talking about the shame cycle. I told her that the scammer's greatest weapon was her own embarrassment. He knew that the more money she sent, the less likely she was to tell anyone, because telling someone meant admitting she'd been tricked. That's how these predators keep the tap running. They turn your own pride against you. I told her, the way you kill the shame is by dragging it into the light. You came on this show. You told your story. You let the world see your mistake. By doing that, you've taken away his power. He can't blackmail you with the truth if you've already told it yourself. I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders as I said that. The secret was out, and once the secret is out, it can't hurt you anymore. As the cameras started to pull back and the session wound down, I watched the three of them, Jim, Martha, and Sarah, standing together. They weren't fixed yet. There were still a lot of hard conversations to have on the car ride home and in the months to follow. There would be days when Sarah would miss the ping of her phone and the sweet nothings Christian would send her. There would be days when Jim would get angry all over again about the wasted money. But for the first time in over a year, they were all living in the same world. They were all looking at the same map. And that in itself is a victory. I told Sarah, this is day one of the rest of your life. It's going to be a long, hard climb, but at least your feet are on solid ground. Don't you ever look back at that ghost. He has nothing for you but a hole in your pocket and a hole in your heart. I followed up with Sarah about 6 months after she left my stage. Recovery from a trauma like this isn't a straight line. It's a jagged uphill climb, and she was the first to admit that some days the air felt very thin. The first few weeks after the show were the hardest. She told me that she felt like an addict in withdrawal. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and reach for her nightstand, her thumb twitching to check for a notification that wasn't there. The silence of her phone was deafening. It was the sound of her fantasy dying. And for a while, she didn't know who she was without the role of Christian's fiancé. But that's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Once you're down there, the only thing left to do is start digging your way out. She went back to work at the pharmacy, but this time, the money wasn't going into a ghost pocket. Every paycheck, she would walk into that same bank where she had once wired away her future, and she would make a payment on her debt. She told my producers that the first time she did it, she cried right there at the teller window. But they weren't the same tears she'd shed on my stage. These were tears of ownership. She was finally taking responsibility for her life, $100 at a time. It's going to take her years, maybe a decade, to fully recover what she lost. But she told me that every payment felt like she was buying back a piece of her soul that she'd sold to a thief. Jim and Martha changed too. They stopped being the shouting parents and started being the supporting partners. Jim realized that his daughter didn't need a lecture on how she'd failed. She needed a roadmap for how to succeed. They started having Sunday dinners again, where the phones were left in a basket by the front door. They started really talking about things other than the scam. Sarah told me that she realized she had been looking for a hero in Dubai when the people who were actually willing to save her were sitting across the dinner table the whole time. I think about this case often when I look at the world today. We are living in an era of digital isolation, where we are all more connected than ever, yet more alone than we have ever been. We're walking around with these high-powered computers in our pockets, gambling our emotional well-being on the validation of strangers. Sarah's story is a cautionary tale, yes, but it's also a story about the resilience of the human spirit. She was targeted because she had a heart that wanted to believe in something bigger than herself. The scammer tried to use her capacity for love as a weapon against her, but in the end, that same capacity for love redirected toward herself and her family is what is going to save her. She sent me a photo a few weeks ago. It wasn't a photo of a skyscraper or a luxury car. It was a photo of her and her mother hiking in a local park. She wasn't wearing makeup, and she wasn't trying to look like a consultant's wife. She just looked like a 22-year-old girl who was finally comfortable in her own skin. She's not looking for a rescue anymore. She's building her own life on her own terms in the real world. And that is a future that no scammer can ever take away from her. The cost of her lesson was $85,000, but the value of her freedom is something you can't put a price tag on. She's grounded, she's present, and for the first time in a long time, she's actually awake.